Hello again, I'm Des Asante from the Tech Muse Academy. Welcome back to another episode of the Tech Muse podcast. For the next couple of weeks, I'm actually going to put together a small series on a subject that I've been asked about many times on many different occasions by many different people. And that is what to do when you're stuck with writer's block. You're a music producer, you're a songwriter. You got writer's block, or what I like to call blank page syndrome. What are some ways to get over that? And in an effort to help people with that particular issue, I thought it might be wise for us to cover some very basic music theory for both songwriters and music producers that will help you to get out of this rut of songwriter's block or blank page syndrome. I've found in my experience that when I'm strumming on my guitar or banging on my piano and just nothing is inspiring me, or I find myself playing the same things that my muscles have always played over and over again, and I'm having a hard time breaking into something new, some new territory musically, that what I'll do typically is pull out a pencil and a paper and apply some of the knowledge that I've learned along the way in terms of music theory to get me started, to come up with a basic framework that I can then build upon in my production or in my songwriting process. I found that having a bit of basic understanding of the way music works, Western diatonic music is what it's commonly referred to. I make that distinction because if you go to the eastern part of the globe, India, places like that, they have an entirely different science of music, an entirely different set of mathematics where they get their musical ideas from. But if we are talking about Western, what they call diatonic music, there are some very basic sort of laws that you can either work with or break, depending on your mood and what you're trying to accomplish, to express yourself musically. So I want to cover some of those basics over the next couple of episodes. And today, the subject is 7 notes, 7 chords. And this is sort of a fundamental principle of diatonic theory. Don't let the word intimidate you. It's just the word that represents the 12-tone scale that we have in Western music, and how we are able to choose 7 of those notes to make a scale or a key that will inform the decisions that we make going forward in terms of what chords can I use that will sound 100% appropriate every time, because there are certain rules that are repeatable no matter what key you're in, and then how can I bend or break those rules to add character and interest, tension, release, these kinds of things into my music, okay? So today I want to talk about how we get those 7 notes and how we are able to build 7 chords off of those notes, okay? So stick with me. If you find this, by the way, if you're listening to this in iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play Music, and you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, you might find it beneficial to head on over to techmuseacademy.com, look for episode 64, and I believe it's 64, and watch the video that's associated with this, okay? So here we go. Let's break it down. The first thing you want to do, let's have a look at a piano keyboard. I've got one up on the screen here. It's actually interactive, so I can play notes and you can hear what's going on as well. You'll notice that the musical alphabet, for starters, has only 7 letters in it. It goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G. After you get to G, the next note is A. You just rinse and repeat as you move through the keys on your instrument, or the notes, the frets on the guitar, whatever your instrument of choice is. So there are 7 letters, but you'll also notice that between a number of these letters is another note. That's referred to as the sharp or the flat sometimes, and I won't confuse you with the details there. Just know that it's the in-between the letter notes, okay? So together, if we look at one octave, this keyboard starts at C. So if we go from C to C, you'll notice that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 notes before we get back to the repetition again. The second octave is what it's referred to as, okay? So there's 12 notes in the musical scale, but we only ever really use 7 of them to achieve our basic, what they call diatonic set or key signature, okay? In the case of C major, if you are familiar with the do re mi sound, do re mi fa sol la ti do, there are 7 notes. You'll notice the do on the end is the same as the do on the beginning, so don't let that confuse you that it's an 8th note. It's actually do re mi fa sol la ti, and then you're back to do again. So there's 7 notes in that in a typical scale, okay? So, and I'll play it for you on the keyboard here. Okay, and that gives you that traditional major scale do re mi sound that I'm sure you're probably familiar with by this point in the game. Okay, so let's take a closer look and find out how we achieve that sound, and this will help you to be able to write in other keys, or to take a song that perhaps you are trying to sing that's maybe a little outside of your range and transpose it into a different key. These are some of the things you'll be able to do with this simple information. So let's have a look at what we're doing here. When we play the first note, do, in the scale, for us to get to the second note, re, we've actually skipped one of the keys on the piano. So we've actually gone from the C, we've jumped over the C sharp and landed on the D. That interval, that from one note skipping by the next one to land on the following one, is what's referred to as a tone, a full tone, or a full step. Okay? If I went from C to C sharp, that would be referred to as a semitone or a half step. Okay? So for us to get from do to re, we moved a full tone. From re to mi, we moved a full tone as well because we skipped over the D sharp. From do re mi to fa, from E to F, you'll notice that there is no black key in the middle, so we've only moved a semitone. So we went a tone, a semitone, and then we're going a tone again, a tone again, a tone again, and a semitone. Now that formula, that pattern, no matter what note on the piano you start on, if you follow that pattern and move from the first note, up a tone, a semitone, 3 more tones, and a semitone, you will have that do, re, mi sound. And the name of the scale would be whatever note you started on. Let me give you a quick example. If I wanted to play the D major scale. Now, if I just play the white keys, listen to what it sounds like. That does not sound like that do, re, mi major scale sound that we had just heard when we started on C. Just so happens that C has no sharps or flats in it, no black keys on the piano in it. So that's why I oftentimes use it as a point to demonstrate, because it's less confusing. But let's follow the formula. Once again, it's 2 tones and a semitone, and then 3 tones and a semitone. Okay? So let's start from D. So we're going D, tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. And if I play that again, now we have that do, re, mi sound, that traditional major scale sound. And the reason why I'm starting with the major scale is because this is the point from which everything else is built from. Once you know that, once you know how to figure out that scale, what are the 7 notes that are in this scale? Once you can figure that out, then you can apply a bunch of the little tips and tricks that I'm going to cover in some subsequent videos in this series to actually generate musical ideas, even without your instrument in your hand. It's a beautiful thing. I can pull out a pencil and a paper and I can write down some things, having never heard it, pick up my instrument and play it, knowing that it will sound musical, it will sound tasteful. It may require further development, and I may get creative with it and break some rules and add in some notes that technically are wrong. That's what the musicians refer to as an accidental, even if you play it deliberately. If you play a note that's outside of the key that we've just discovered, then you're adding in what's referred to as an accidental. We'll cover that in another time. So once again, the formula is 2 tones and a semitone, 3 tones and a semitone. Okay? One more quick example. Let's say I start from E. So I start on E, I go a full tone, a semitone, a full tone, a full tone, a full tone, and a semitone. And sure enough, it has that do, re, mi major scale sound to it. Okay, so what's the point of all this? Well, once I know what the notes are in the key that I'm deciding to write in, once I know what those notes are, I can then determine what the chords are in that key that are going to work well for me no matter what. Okay, so this is where we get to point number 2. So again, if you need to rewind this and just clarify the how to determine what the notes are, go ahead and do that. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is, now that we know the notes, what are the chords that we can play? The title of this episode is 7 Notes, 7 Chords. Okay, so we've figured out the notes. So let's go back to the key of C, because it's very easy to look at. It's all white keys on the piano, no sharps, no flats, no black keys. In other words, if you're thinking about it in terms of a keyboard. Once again, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Now, what we can do from here is we can take each of those 7 notes and we can make a chord out of those notes. Now, the way you make a chord is very, very simple. The way you make a simple, what they call triad, it's really quite simple. All you do is take the note you're on, skip a note in the scale, not skip a semitone, but skip a note in the scale out of those 7 notes. So note number 1 is C, note number 2 is D, so we're going to skip that, and we're going to use E. We're going to skip the next note, and we're going to use G. So I'm playing the first note, the third note, and the 5th note, okay? And if you hear those together, and if I were to play those together, let's see what this chord mode button does. There it is. That's a C major chord, okay? So if I play the chord based on the very first note in the scale, it just so happens that it's a major chord. There is a reason for that, which I'll cover in a subsequent episode. But let's have a look at another one. If I take the second note in the scale and I do the same thing, play a note, skip a note again, and let's hear it. That note, based off of the second degree of the scale, just so happens to be a minor chord. So it happens to be a D minor in this case. The root of the chord is the note on the bottom in the way that I'm showing you here. There are other ways to play the chords, but we'll save that for another conversation. Okay. Now, if I play a chord based on the third note, the E, so 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to do the same thing. Play a note, skip a note, play a note, skip a note, play a note. Okay. And if we listen to that chord, that just so happens to be an E minor chord. So you'll notice that the chord we built from the first degree of the scale was major. The chords we built from the second and third degrees of the scale just so happen to be minor. And by the way, this is always the case, no matter what key you're in. This is just a rule of musical theory, of diatonic theory. And again, in a subsequent episode, I'll explain why. If we take a look at the fourth chord, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to build a chord from the F now. Same thing, skip a note, play a note, skip a note, play a note. Let's hear it. That happens to be a major chord, an F major chord. If we were to continue and play the G, B, D chord, that would also be a major chord. The A, C, E would be a minor chord. And then the last note, before we get back to the beginning again, the last note is the weird one, the 7th degree of the scale, which in this case happens to be a B. If we were to play B, D, and F, let's hear what it sounds like together. B, D, F. Listen to the sound of this chord. It's a very strange sound. It doesn't sound major, like the happy, bright sound. It doesn't sound minor, like the sad sound. It sounds more peculiar still. There's a reason for it, which again we'll cover in a subsequent video, but suffice it to say for now that that's what they call a diminished chord, okay? And again, don't let the terminology intimidate you. It's just the name of that particular sound of note combinations, of note choices, okay? So when we go back and review what we've just discovered, and feel free to write this down, by the way, because this never changes. No matter what key you're in, this is always true. The chord built off of the first degree of the scale is a major chord. The second and third are minor chords. The fourth and fifth are major chords. The sixth is a minor chord. And the seventh is a diminished chord. Okay? So chords 1, 4, and 5 are major chords. They're referred to as the primary chords because they're the major chords in the major scale. Notes chords 2, 3, and 6, and all I'm referring to is the chord you build when you start on the second note or the third note or the sixth note of the scale are always minor. And then the very last one, the number 7, the B in this case, is that weird sounding diminished chord. So if you'd like to, for now, you can forget about that. And let's just talk about the primary chords and the secondary chords. The major chords in the key and the minor chords in the key. 1, 4, and 5, primary chords. 2, 3, 6 are your secondary chords, okay? And they happen to be the minor chords as well. So hopefully this makes sense. So now with this little bit of information, part 1, how to determine what notes are actually in the do, re, mi, the key, the scale that you choose to write in. Because if you want to write in F instead someday to get a different vibe, a different sound, this will inform what notes and chords you're able to choose from. In the key of C, note number 1 is C, chord number 1, C major, because 1 is always major. Note number 2 is D, chord number 2 is D minor, because 2 is always minor, and so on and so forth. So armed with this knowledge, part 1, what are the notes? Part 2, what are the chords? Okay, 7 notes, 7 chords. I can write a song that I know will sound reasonably good without ever touching an instrument. I'll give you an example. Let's do something, and I'll write this down, and I'll put it up on the screen when I edit this video. I'm gonna go. Let's say I'm gonna go 1, 6, 2, 5. Okay, so in the key of C, chord 1 would be C major, because 1 is always major. Chord 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 would be A minor, because 6 is always minor. Chord 2, 1, 2 would be D minor, because because 2 is always minor. It's the secondary chord. And then 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's the G note, would be a G major, because 5 is a major chord always, okay? So let's hear what that sounds like. I'm gonna grab my guitar and I'm gonna play this in the key of C. So once again, we're playing C major, A minor, D minor, and G major. And I'll just loop that a couple times. Having never touched my instrument, I am confident that it will sound musically appropriate. Nothing will offend my ear. Let's have a listen. Sounds pretty. Sounds beautiful, as far as I'm concerned. That's a piece of music right there. Fairly standard sounding, because that particular chord progression, 1, 6, 2, 5, has been used a gazillion times in a gazillion different songs. Once you start to understand this, you'll go back and listen to songs you like, and you'll pick it out. You'll start to hear these familiar movements from one chord to another, okay? So I hope you find this useful and interesting. I hope you stay tuned for the next episodes in this particular series as we get a little deeper into it. But again, the main thing I wanted to leave you with is when you're in a rut, when you're in a songwriter's block or that blank page syndrome, pull out a pencil and a paper, pick a scale, just pick a letter, go E, okay? Grab the E, figure out the tone, the semitone, the tone, the semitone to determine what 7 notes are in that key. Remember to put a major sign beside 1, 4, and 5, and a minor sign. Major is, by the way, just a plus sign typically, and a minus sign for a minor chord, just to make it simple for you. Put a minor sign underneath the 2, the 3, and the 6, and then a diminished, which is a circle, on the 7th chord. We'll talk about diminished chords another day. But from there, just start writing down numbers, numeric patterns, and then play them on your instrument and find out which order, which progression of chords is most inspiring to your creative juices, I suppose you could say, okay? It's a very, very simple way to determine what notes are available, what chords are available to get you started, and from there, go ahead and break the rules. You know, if that major chord, try it minor and see what your ear tells you. You can start to make decisions that way based on your ear after you've gotten past the blank page, okay? So that's the main thing. There's one last thing I wanted to leave you with or to point out before we wrap it up for today is that you'll notice that on the piano, again, if we take a glance back over there, all of these keys have a sharp key in between them with the exception of 2. The E has nothing between it and the F. Same thing with the B and the C. So if you can remember that, even if you're not in front of a piano, just remember that E and B have no sharp after them. Then you'll be able to do this in your head without the keyboard. So for example, if I want to know what is a tone up from D, well, D has a sharp, so I would skip the sharp and I would land on the E. So a tone up, a full step up from D is E. However, if I'm on the E and I want to know a full step up, a tone up, E has no sharp. So the half step would be the F, the full step would be the F sharp. So one tone up from E is F sharp, okay? Same thing when I'm on B. When I go a full tone up from B, I land on a C sharp because B has no sharp, so the semitone, the half step higher would be the C, the full step would be the C sharp. Okay, so that's just the last little bit of information I wanted to impart with you, just to sort of seal the deal on this first topic. 7 notes, 7 chords. Put your instrument away, grab a pencil and a paper, write down 5 or 6 chord progressions right now, grab your instrument and decide which one you want to work with, okay? And we will see you next week.